From a boy born without a quirk and once dismissed as useless, Izuku Midoriya stood far from his dream of becoming a hero. Yet it was his unyielding determination that allowed Deku to rise up and become the successor to a power capable of changing the entire world. In this video, we will look back at every form of Deku's power across each stage of his growth throughout My Hero Academia. Quirkless Deku. Quirkless Deku represents the very starting point of Midoriya's journey toward becoming a great hero. Born into a society where quirks define everything, Deku quickly realized that he was someone left behind. As his peers awakened their abilities and dreamed of heroic futures, Deku had nothing but a frail body. He even had to live under the shadow and contempt of his childhood friend Katsuki Bakugo. However, one thing Deku never lost was his aspiration. Even though he could not fight, he devoted all his time to observing, analyzing, and recording the combat traits of heroes in his notebooks, quietly accumulating knowledge as a way to compensate for his natural disadvantage. The turning point came when Deku recklessly rushed in to save Bakugo from the sludge villain, fully aware that he was completely powerless. It was not a calculated decision, but an instinctive moment in which the hero within Deku awakened, driving his body forward before he could even feel fear. This fearless recklessness completely changed All Might's perspective. Seeing the qualities of a future symbol of peace, All Might chose Deku as the successor to One for All. To prepare for this transfer, Deku endured 10 months of brutal training to forge a body strong enough to withstand the power. After inheriting the quirk through a strand of All Might's hair, he did not simply gain a new ability. He officially began his path toward becoming a great hero, continuing his story from the starting point of someone once deemed powerless. One for All Uncontrolled. Immediately after inheriting One for All, Deku quickly realized that this power far exceeded the limits of his body. During the UA entrance exam, although he successfully destroyed the giant robot to save Ochako Uraraka with a single punch, Deku nearly destroyed himself in the process. The overwhelming burst of power shattered his arm, leaving him unable to continue fighting. From that point on, Deku began to think of creative ways to use One for All without causing severe damage to his body. Through training, he learned to concentrate all of the power into a small part of his body, creating techniques such as Delaware Smash 100%, where One for All is released through his fingers to generate long-range shockwaves. This method allowed him to keep fighting without completely breaking his body after every attack. Thanks to this adaptation, Deku was able to defeat Bakugo in the combat training exercise, engage in an extremely intense battle with Shoto during the sports festival, and endure the villain's assault at USJ. However, this state was still only a temporary solution. Each use of One for All continued to exact a heavy toll on Deku's body through severe injuries. He clearly understood that to truly move forward on the path of a hero, Deku needed a form that would allow One for All to operate throughout his entire body without destroying himself. Deku Full Cowling. Full Cowling marks the first major turning point in Deku's journey toward truly mastering One for All. After suffering repeated severe injuries from concentrating all of the power into single blows, Deku realized that the problem did not lie with One for All itself, but with how he was using it. Under the training of Gran Torino, All Might's former mentor, Deku began learning to disperse the power instead of releasing it in sudden bursts. From this realization, One for All Full Cowl was born. Unlike his previous methods, Full Cowling allows Deku to coat his entire body with One for All. The energy continuously flows through every muscle, increasing his speed, strength, and reflexes without destroying his body. In the early stages, Deku could only maintain about 5% of the power, but that was already enough for him to keep up with high-speed movements such as Tenya Ida's Recipro Burst. One of his representative attacks at this stage was the 5% Detroit Smash. By observing Gran Torino and Bakugo, Deku also learned how to use recoil to propel himself through the air. This freed him from being restricted to ground-based movement, allowing him to maneuver easily through buildings and confined spaces while opening up more flexible combat options. It was Full Cowling at 5% that enabled Deku to intervene in the battle at Hosu City and alongside Ida, Shoto confront Stain. In addition, instead of continuing to rely solely on his arms, Deku shifted his focus to his legs and developed One for All Full Cowl shoot style. By learning movement from Gran Torino, explosive power from Bakugo, and kicking techniques from Ida, Deku gradually built an entirely new fighting style. With support from Mei Hatsume, he also obtained Iron Souls that significantly increased the destructive power of his kicks. Techniques such as St. Louis Smash and Manchester Smash began to appear from this point onward. Over time, and after the Provisional Hero License exam, Deku raised his Full Cowling control to around 8%. At this level, he was fast and strong enough to fight Bakugo on even footing, demonstrating that One for All was gradually becoming a natural part of him. During the battle against Overhaul, Deku reached the 20% threshold for the first time without breaking his bones, though he could only maintain it briefly due to the extreme strain on his body. By the time of his internship with Endeavor, Deku confirmed that he could safely use One for All at around 10% to 15% under normal conditions. While he could still push it to 20%, the pain and overload meant meant that this level could not yet be used consistently. Full Cowling is not just a technique, but the foundation for all of Deku's later evolution. It transformed One For All from a destructive force into a controllable tool, while also establishing new limits that Deku would have to surpass in order to face increasingly powerful villains in My Hero Academia. One For All 100%. One For All 100% is the most dangerous state Deku reached in the early stages, where the power far exceeds what his body can endure. In essence, using One For All at 100% means that Deku releases the full power of One For All into the part of his body used for the attack. The resulting force reaches a devastating level, but the price is almost always severe injury. During his match against Shoto at the sports festival, Deku recklessly pushing One For All to 100% caused his arm to be critically damaged. As a result, he had to undergo surgery and was left with permanent scars. This also served as a harsh warning about the limits of his body if he continued to overuse this power in the future. However, the moment that most clearly reveals the true meaning of One For All 100% occurred during the life or death battle against Muscular at the summer training camp. When faced with the imminent danger to the life of the boy Kota, Deku was driven into a corner. With no strategy or calculation left, he forced his body beyond all limits and unleashed the move known as 1,000,000% Delaware Detroit Smash. In reality, the number 1,000,000% does not represent an actual level of physical power, but rather a symbol of the plus ultra spirit. Driven by adrenaline, rage, and absolute desperation, Deku poured everything he had left into a single punch. By combining the shockwave of Delaware Smash with the direct impact of Detroit Smash, Deku blasted Muscular away and defeated an opponent he previously had no chance of overcoming. One For All Full Cowling 100%. One For All Full Cowling 100% is the moment when Deku first reaches a level of power approaching that of All Might. Unlike earlier uses where he concentrated 100% of the power into a single punch, in this state, Deku disperses One For All throughout his entire body. This allows him to achieve the true maximum speed, strength, and mobility of One For All without being immediately destroyed after each attack. The first time this state appeared was during the life or death battle against Overhaul. At that moment, Eri was clinging tightly to Deku, and her quirk Rewind unintentionally became the key that shattered every limit. Every injury Deku suffered while forcing One For All to 100% was instantly reversed by Rewind, even before he could feel the pain. Because of this, Deku was able to maintain a level of power that his body would normally never be able to endure. In that brief moment, Deku entered the strongest version of himself up to that point. His appearance also changed dramatically. His hair stood on end and glowed intensely, while arcs of energy shifted into a blue-green hue, enveloping his body in a powerful pressure-like aura. In this state, Deku moved so fast that he could run through the air by riding wind pressure, completely overwhelming Overhaul, even after he fused with Katsukame and transformed into a massive monster. In the movie, Deku recreated this state once again when facing Fleck Turn. In that battle, he moved at speeds beyond what the naked eye could follow, relentlessly overwhelming his opponent's reflective quirk with a barrage of attacks before finishing the fight with the iconic United States of Smash. Despite how impressive it was One For All, Full Cowling 100% is also an extremely risky state. At that time, Eri was still unable to fully control Rewind, and without Aizawa's timely intervention, Deku could have been rewound beyond safe limits. 2 Quirks Deku. Black Whip. Black Whip marks the moment when One For All is no longer simply a power-enhancing quirk, but begins to reveal its true nature. This ability first appeared during the joint training battle between Class 1A and Class 1B. In the middle of the fight, Deku suddenly awakened the quirk of the 5th holder of One For All, Daigoro Banjo. That quirk was Black Whip, which allows the user to generate black energy tendrils used for aerial movement and restraining opponents. However, when activated through One For All, Black Whip in Deku's hands was far stronger than its original form. Because he was completely unprepared, Deku lost control of Black Whip, placing his classmates in serious danger. With support from All Might and Bakugo, Deku began the process of learning how to restrain and familiarize himself with Black Whip. Through training, Deku realized that the key to Black Whip lies in emotions. The more intense the emotions, especially anger, the more violently Black Whip erupts. This meant that in order to use this quirk effectively, Deku had to gain control over his own mental state. Instead of trying to release its full power, he learned to use a weaker and more stable version, strong enough to support movement and combat without losing control. By the time of the Paranormal Liberation War, Deku was able to use Black Whip proficiently in real combat. When facing Shigaraki, he wrapped multiple layers of Black Whip around his body for defense, while also firing the tendrils into the ground to restrain the spread of decay, turning Black Whip into a tactical tool for close-quarters combat. Later, during his confrontation with Lady Nagant, Deku demonstrated an even higher level of mastery by using thin strands of Black Whip to track bullet trajectories and pursue his opponent through the air. Even in a situation where both of of his arms were broken, he was still able to fire Black Whip from his mouth in a technique inspired by Tsuyu Asui, known as Froppy Style. Black Whip not only marks Deku gaining his second quirk, but also proves that his journey of mastering One for All has entered an entirely new stage, where power comes not only from physical strength, but from emotional control and tactical thinking. 3 quirks, Deku. Float. Float is the next crucial piece in the evolution of Deku's power, and it directly addresses one of his greatest weaknesses. Float is the quirk of Nana Shimura, the 7th holder of One for All and the mentor of All Might. When this ability awakens, Deku is no longer bound to the ground. Instead of constantly jumping or relying entirely on Black Whip for aerial movement, Deku can now hover and maintain his position in midair by his own will. However, float in Deku's hands does not stop at simple flight. Thanks to the massive energy stored within One for All, this ability is amplified far beyond its original version, allowing Izuku to move through the air at extremely high speeds, effectively turning the sky into his primary battlefield. Float first demonstrated its true value during the Paranormal Liberation War, when Shigaraki activated Decay on a massive scale, creating a wave of destruction that erased everything on the ground. Deku instinctively activated Float. He shot into the air and simultaneously used Black Whip to pull multiple heroes along with him, helping them escape an attack with annihilating force. After this event, Deku began to integrate Float as a core part of his overall combat system. When facing Muscular, he combined Float with Smokescreen, hovering above the cloud of smoke to obscure his opponent's vision while calmly calculating the finishing blow. In long-distance movement situations, Deku even stacked Float with Fajin and Air Force, launching himself from Okudo Island and flying straight toward the UA Flying Fortress. This method of application not only allows Deku to cross vast distances in a short amount of time, but also completely compensates for the greatest weakness of Black Whip, which becomes nearly ineffective when there are no surrounding objects to latch onto. 4 quirks, Deku. Danger Sense. Danger Sense is the ability that elevates Deku's survivability and reaction speed to an entirely new level. Danger Sense originally belonged to Hikage Shinomori, the 4th holder of One for All. This quirk allows the user to perceive potential threats within their surroundings and react before the danger fully manifests. Danger Sense first revealed itself during the Paranormal Liberation War. Right after Bakugo was critically injured by Shigaraki, Deku began to feel intense stabbing pain in his head, the cause of which he could not understand at the time. In that moment, Deku unconsciously activated Danger Sense, pushing past the pain to continue fighting. However, because the quirk awakened so suddenly and without any prior training, Deku struggled to process the constant warning signals flooding directly into his brain. At times, the overwhelming amount of information nearly caused him to lose consciousness on the battlefield. Even so, as he gradually adapted, Danger Sense quickly became one of Deku's most dangerous tools. He was able to evade close-range attacks from top-tier opponents such as Muscular, Shigaraki, and even dodge long-range bullets fired by Lady Nagant while in midair. Beyond that, Deku also began to use Danger Sense as a form of criminal radar. Whenever the sensation of danger reached him, he could immediately determine its direction and rush straight toward the source of the threat. 5 quirks, Deku. Smokescreen. Smokescreen is a clear demonstration of how Deku turns an ability that seems weak into an extremely dangerous tactical weapon. Smokescreen originally belonged to N, the 6th holder of One for All. This quirk allows the user to emit a large amount of dense smoke directly from their body, covering a wide area to block vision and create surprise. However, the weakness of Smokescreen is equally clear. Without proper control, the user can be engulfed by the smoke as well, completely losing visibility and spatial awareness. Not long after the Paranormal Liberation War, Deku awakened Smokescreen and was quickly forced to put it into real combat. The first time this ability was clearly demonstrated was during his confrontation with Muscular, who had just escaped from prison. By combining Smokescreen with Float, Deku hovered in the air while blanketing an entire city block in thick smoke, completely sealing Muscular's vision before delivering the finishing blow. Smokescreen was then used effectively again in Deku's battle against Lady Nagant. He used the smoke to obscure his opponent's vision while constantly moving between buildings, dodging attacks, and storing energy before closing in and restraining Nagant in close quarters combat. At a higher level, Smokescreen was also utilized during Deku's confrontation with Shigaraki. He covered the battlefield in dense smoke while firing Black Whip tendrils into the ground to prevent decay from spreading, turning Smokescreen into a core component of his defensive and area control strategy. This method of application was so effective that even N was astonished, witnessing a quirk once considered the weakest become a key tool in the most intense battles. Smokescreen does not possess direct destructive power, but in Deku's hands, it becomes the perfect piece for a flexible fighting style that controls the pace of combat and overwhelms opponents through strategy. 6 Quirks Deku. Fa-Jin. Fa-Jin is the key piece that allows Deku to move closer to 100% power without destroying his body. Fa-Jin originally belonged to Bruce, the third holder of One For All. This quirk allows the user to store kinetic energy by repeatedly performing the same movement, then release that stored energy at a chosen moment to produce an explosive burst of speed and power. Instead of being forced to release everything at once, Fa-Jin also allows partial releases, providing greater flexibility in combat. However, the quirk has a clear weakness in its charging time. If the energy is released too early, the effect is almost negligible. Fa-Jin was officially brought into real combat by Deku during his confrontation with Lady Nagant. Throughout the intense pursuit, Deku repeatedly contracted and extended his legs while evading long-range shots, defending himself while silently storing Fa-Jin energy in his legs. At the same time, he used Smokescreen to disrupt his opponent's vision, creating the conditions needed to extend the charging time. When he finally released all of that stored energy, Deku produced an astonishing burst of power with extreme acceleration, fast enough to surpass the speed of a bullet and rescue Overhaul just in time from a fatal shot. The peak of this combination is the technique known as Faux 100% Manchester Smash. By stacking Fa-Jin on top of One For All and full Cowling, Deku generates power that approaches 100% without actually releasing One For All at its maximum. That single kick ended the battle with Lady Nagant and proved that Fa-Jin is the key that allows Deku to approach 100% in a smarter, safer, and more strategically superior way. 7 Quirks Deku. Gearshift. Gearshift is the final piece and also the most dangerous power Deku has ever awakened. Gearshift originally belonged to Kudo, the second holder of One For All. This quirk allows the user to directly interfere with the speed of objects moving through space, even bending conventional physical limits. Even in its original state, Gearshift is an extremely terrifying ability, but when amplified by One For All, it becomes a double-edged sword that only Deku can wield. Due to its enormous energy consumption, Deku can only use Gearshift for a very short period of time, roughly 5 minutes before his body enters a state of oxygen deprivation and he loses consciousness. Because of this, Deku treats Gearshift as his final trump card, activating it only when there are no other options left. Gearshift was first fully unleashed during the final battle against Shigaraki. The moment the ability was activated, Deku's speed skyrocketed to the point where each punch broke the sound barrier with power, and acceleration increasing so violently that Shigaraki could barely react. After that, Deku stacked Gearshift with Fa-Jin to create a state known as Overdrive. According to Yoichi's description, this moment was like Deku unlocking 120% of his own power, surpassing every previous user of One For All in history. With Overdrive, Deku reached full-powered Deku form, a state where all the quirks of the predecessors are perfectly utilized at the same time. This is the strongest version of Izuku ever shown a hero capable of confronting Shigaraki head-on in the battle that would decide the fate of the world. Carnage Deku. Carnage Deku is a life-or-death state in which Izuku forces himself beyond the absolute limits of the human body in order to keep fighting. This form appears in the final phase of the battle against Shigaraki after Deku repeatedly pushes One For All beyond safe limits. Using Gearshift at maximum intensity burns through his muscles and leaves his entire motor system almost completely paralyzed. At that point, his body should no longer have been able to move. But instead of collapsing, Deku activates a final measure. He uses Black Whip to forcibly keep his body functioning. Black energy tendrils wrap tightly around every muscle group, and joint pulling and stretching his body as if he were a puppet on strings. Deku is no longer moving through normal physical strength, but through sheer willpower, controlling his severely injured body with his own quirk. Deku's appearance becomes feral and distorted, no longer resembling an ordinary student or hero, but rather a being created solely for combat. Despite being in a state of complete exhaustion, Deku continues to overwhelm Shigaraki with irrational speed and power, even smashing straight through Shigaraki's fingers in close combat. It is in this overlay form that Deku forcibly transfers One For All to Shigaraki, setting the stage for the next phase of the battle and leading directly into Ember's form. Ember's form. Ember's form is the state Deku enters after trading away the entirety of One For All to bring the battle to an end. At this point, Deku no longer possesses a complete quirk. What remains are only the embers of One For All, allowing him to continue using its power for brief moments before it completely fades away. By nature, each time Deku activates One For All, in this state, a portion of the remaining embers is burned away. This means that Izuku is gradually forcing himself back into a quirkless state, identical to how he began his journey as a hero. Fully aware of this limit, Deku pours all of his remaining power into one final strike. In Ember's form, he defeats All For One once and for all, while also erasing Shigaraki and ending the greatest threat the world has ever faced. This is no longer a victory of overwhelming power, but the result of absolute sacrifice. One For All Hero Deku. As the embers of One For All gradually fade away and he returns to a quirkless state, Deku no longer appears on the battlefield on a regular basis. Instead, he chooses chooses to remain at UA as a teacher, continuing the path that All Might once walked. For Deku, passing on the dream of becoming a hero to the next generation is another way to continue protecting the world. Of course, that does not mean Deku ever stopped missing the life of a hero. Fortunately, thanks to major advancements in hero technology and the support of his former classmates, a new opportunity was created. Melissa Shield and Mei Hatsume worked together to develop a modern combat suit based on the battle data All Might left behind from his confrontation with All for One. The project was funded by all of Class 1A, with Bakugo being the one who pushed it forward most aggressively. The suit can fold down into a small briefcase marked with the familiar seat number 18, and it recreates several well-known abilities such as Black Whip and Float through technology. With this equipment, Deku returns to the battlefield once more and quickly rises to the rank of number 4 Pro Hero, earning the title of One for All Hero Deku. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos.